Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to start with contemporary times, a current issue, if you will, and I'm going to move back towards creation, all in the time of 25 minutes. And I'm going to beg your indulgence right now that I'm going to use, especially in the contemporary examples, a lot of American examples. It's the tradition that I know best. I like to talk about the things that I happen to know something about. And I think that what happened around Muslims in America these past several months actually has had an impact on Muslims all over the world. So I hope you'll find some relevance and some inspiration in this. I'm going to begin with the bad news. Here's the bad news. I think what we just experienced in the United States, and what I'm calling the summer and fall of intolerance, was a storm of hatred, but the hurricane is yet to come. Right? Let's just review very briefly the set of incidents around the Cordoba house based in Lower Manhattan, colloquially known as the Ground Zero Mosque. A set of Muslims who have been praying and serving their community in Lower Manhattan for 2 decades, their house of worship was too small to hold their congregation. And so they needed to move. And instead of building another mosque, what they chose to do was to build an institution that could serve the broader public good in the form of an interfaith center. They found an ideal building for this in an unused Burlington coat factory, purchased the building, and prepared to launch their center. And then came the storm. A set of people started calling this a victory mosque at Ground Zero, the terrorist command center in Lower Manhattan. What was happening? Effectively, a group of Muslims who were attempting to live out the Islamic tradition of tolerance and cooperation were lumped in with the heinous terrorists of 9/11. That group of Muslims, this group of Muslims, all of us are somehow lumped into that category. And I started to despair a little bit more when I saw this sign of a guy at a mosque protest, right? Because these protests were vociferous. The sign said, "All I need to know about Islam, I learned on 9/11. And I started to think to myself, there is not just an ignorance out there about Islam and Muslims, there is a willful ignorance. This guy is saying, I don't want to know anything else except for what I saw on 9/11. And then political candidates from North Carolina to Nevada, literally 500 to 3,000 miles away, started basing their campaigns on their opposition to this Cordoba house in Lower Manhattan. They had done the polls. They had run the numbers. There was a political constituency of Islamophobia. There were people out there who will say, I will vote for you if you don't like Muslims. But it gets worse. It gets a lot worse. Right? Daisy Khan, the sister who was one of the leaders in the Cordoba House initiative, she's on television one day explaining the traditions of tolerance and cooperation in Islam. And one of the other people on TV, in front of a live audience, right, and 3 million people watching on television, says to her, "You're lying. It's called taqiyya." And I thought to myself, how does this guy know the term taqiyya? And then I started to realize, ignorance isn't the worst enemy. Willful ignorance isn't the worst enemy. That guy with the sign that said, "All I need to know about Islam, I learned on 9/11, he's not the worst. Because that guy, you could sit him down and say, actually, there are more days in human history than 9/11, right? There are more people, there are more Muslims than those 19 crazy guys. Let's have a reasoned conversation. There's something really dangerous out there. It's called a pseudo-educated hatred of Muslims. Okay? There are people out there who are proactively acquiring information and then twisting that information to hate Muslims. So dawah doesn't mean teaching to these people. It means domination. Sharia doesn't mean the path to God. It means chopping off somebody's hands. And I got to tell you something. This is not a small group of people. These people have best-selling books, right? These people send out speakers that speak to audiences like this all the time. It is an industry of Islamophobia. And that industry has found a set of political candidates who are willing to carry that message. And my friend said to me stuff like, Eboo, he says, you know, this is just happening around an election. The election of 2010, so don't really worry about it. There's this kind of temporary spate of hatred, but it'll go away. And I'm like, do you think that there's only one election? You don't think that there are other elections to come? Right? You don't think that part of what happens in American midterm elections is that potential presidential candidates test market messages that they hope they can use as presidential candidates in the next election? Right? So when Newt Gingrich comes out and he says, Cordoba, which for you and I and the vast majority of learned people on the planet know stands for a time when Muslim civilization was at its height, was at its strength, when it was especially tolerant, when it was especially cooperative. Newt Gingrich comes out and he says in a major speech, Cordoba stands for Islamist domination. Okay? That's not just ignorance. It's not willful ignorance. It's not even pseudo-educated bigotry. That's cynicism. That's sinful, hateful cynicism. Because guess what? Newt Gingrich has a PhD in history. He knows better. He knows better. What he's banking on is that other people out there, he can inject hatred into their idea of what it means to be a Muslim. So this is all happening during Ramadan. And try as I might, wake up for suhoor, pray, open my fast, I'm despairing, right? I'm angry. I'm hurt. And then I have this brief, blessed conversation with Sheikh Hamza. And he says to me something, shocking. There's a great line by the French philosopher Marcel Proust. He says that the true journey of discovery is not in seeing new landscapes. It's in developing new eyes. And in like 6 lines, Sheikh Hamza gave me new eyes. He says to me, he's like, these are the moments that great people yearn for, because our nations are molten and they can be shaped. Now, Sheikh Hamza wasn't looking at this as a moment of despair or anger or hatred. He was looking at this as an opportunity for Muslims, for humanity. Total change in perspective for me. I thought about this moment in American history. Martin Luther King Jr. leads the Montgomery bus boycott, right? Which is, to that point, the largest peaceful civil rights movement of the civil rights era. 1955, King is 26 years old, and the buses in Montgomery, black people are required to sit in the back of the bus, right? And as learned people know, Rosa Parks, a black woman, one day refused to sit in the back of the bus. And a group of African Americans, righteous folks in Montgomery, Alabama, decided, you know what? We want our basic human dignity, our basic civil rights in America. We should be able to sit anywhere we want on a bus. And they commenced the Montgomery bus boycott. King, this 26-year-old kid, just out of Boston University PhD program, leads the bus boycott. They marched to work for 380 some days. Think about that. Think about walking to work for over a year. King suffers death threats, crosses are burned on his front lawn, his kids are made fun of, his wife is threatened, he spends days in jail. And at the end of the bus boycott, what if they won? I mean, they get to sit where they want on the buses of one provincial city in the United States. That's it. It's not like they won this giant victory. It's not like, every bus in America was integrated. They had the vote. I mean, that was 10 years away still. They won this minor victory. All that pain. Right? And a journalist at the end of the bus boycott asks King, he says, aren't you angry? I mean, aren't you frustrated? Think about all you went through to win this minor thing. And King says, we have the opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into this civilization. This isn't the time for revenge. This is the time for reconciliation. This is the time for redemption. This is the time to build the beloved community. And I feel like what Sheikh Hamza was telling me in those few sentences was maybe in this hurricane of hatred that we have coming to us, we're going to have that opportunity like King did. We're going to have the opportunity to present what it means to be a special mercy upon all the worlds. We're going to have an opportunity to show that Muslims are not a tribal people, interested only in that insults us. We come from a universal tradition, interested in the dignity of every last human being on the planet. We are interested in tolerance, not because intolerance is directed towards Muslims. We are interested in tolerance because we are Muslim and we are required to extend that canopy over everybody. I knew a woman, a young girl, 23 years old. She was an intern at my organization, the Interfaith Youth Corps. All summer, I probably heard her say 6 words. Right? Kind of meek, quiet. Came from a conservative Christian community in California. She went back to that community, and she gets one of these chain emails, 100 reasons to hate Muslims. It's the kind of stuff that's been circulating in, communities across America, Canada, Europe for a long time, right? And she decides she's not going to take it. And she sends back this simple email, right? I met some Muslims this summer, and they were good people. And I did service projects with them, and I learned about their faith. And while I'm a Christian, I respect Islam. I believe it's a beautiful religion. And you know the email she got in return to that? You know the email she got in return? Go back to Mecca University. Where are you hiding your Muslim costume? Are you going to become a terrorist too? This is the church that she had grown up in. I mean, think about this, right? You all have grown up in masjids. Right? She'd known these people for 20 years. She'd been baptized there. You know what she did? She left the church. Think about that. I mean, think about this, right? You get an email, a hateful email. You think it's wrong. You respond in a way you think is right. That only beckons more hate. And you know what you do in response? You stand up for your principles. Right? And I talked to her. I said, Audrey, I feel bad. I mean, first of all, I admire you so much. I feel bad about how this has disrupted your life. I mean, think about this, right? I mean, her parents had to make a decision. Were they still going to go to this church? Were they been going for a half century? And Audrey said, Eboo, I've been reading the Bible more, and I have to tell you, standing up for Muslims, I mean, that was the most Christian thing that I've ever done. There are a lot of people standing up for Muslims right now. A lot of people, right? Michael Bloomberg, the mayor of New York, there is zero political capital in standing up for Muslims. You know what he did during Ramadan in August? He didn't run and hide. He hosted an iftar. You know who he quoted? Imam Faisal, the founder of Cordoba House. That guy is saying, part of what it means to be a Jew is to stand up for Muslims. Now, no intolerance in my city. So, what does it mean to be a Muslim in a time of intolerance? When other people are standing up for us, what does it mean to be a Muslim? You know, in my heart, I keep going back to Surah 2 of the Holy Quran and that story of creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He picks up a lump of clay and He gives it His breath. And that's Adam. That's our ancestor, right? Carrying the breath of God. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Adam, I want you to be my servant and representative on earth, my steward, my trustee over all of creation. Then He calls the angels forth and He says to the angels, I want you to honor Adam, the representative of all humankind. And the angel's first response to God is, why would we honor a creature who will only fiddle and destroy? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns to the angels and says, I know what you do not know. I know what you do not know. I mean, the angels at the beginning were prepared to deny Adam. And God vouches for us, vouches for humankind. Not that He doesn't know the dangers we're going to create, but He knows the goodness He gave us. And then God sets up a contest between Adam and the angels. And He says to the angels, I want you to name the different parts of creation. And the angels say to God, the only knowledge we have is the knowledge you gave us to sing the glories of your name. God turns to Adam and gives him the same task. And Adam can do it. Adam can name the different parts of creation. You know what that means in 21st century hip-hop talk? We can flow with diversity. Right? That's the gift that we have that accompanies the breath of God, the ability to flow powerfully, beautifully with diversity. And we are told over and over in the prophetic cycle that we are meant to be mercies upon this, right? And you know, Muslims have lived out that creed. The only country in Europe with more Jews after the Holocaust than before, Albania. Why? Because Albania is full of Muslims who protected Jews during the Holocaust because they were Muslim. The Muslims of South Africa, Imam Farid Ishaq, Imam Ibrahim Musa, Imam Ibrahim Rasul, Imam Rashid Omar, at the front of the movement against apartheid. All of them, they're either Indian, many of them, either of Indian descent or what South Africans call of colored descent. And when they were offered a deal for special accommodations during the apartheid era, you coloreds, you Indians, you can have this, but the black people can't. They refused the deal. No special privileges for us. No special privileges for Muslims. No special privileges for Muslims. Our responsibility. Only special responsibilities. We take on the responsibility of creating a South Africa of equal dignity and mutual loyalty. It is not because we are Muslim that we want something distinct for us. It is because we are Muslim that we want to offer something distinct for others. I spoke at a conference a few years ago, and one of the panelists was a Rwandan. And she said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I'm the Muslim guy at the conference." And she said, "You're Muslim?" And I said, "Yeah." And she started to cry. And I'm like, what just happened? And she said, "My family is alive because of your people. I said, what? Tell me about this. Perhaps the only organized community in Rwanda that protected and saved Tutsis during the genocide. 1 million people killed in 100 days by machete, by a marauding militia called the Interahamwe. Who protected the group that was being slaughtered? Who brought them into their attics and their basements? Who brought them into their mosques? Who fought the Interahamwe hand to machete? Muslims. This is the legacy we inherit. This is what Muslims have done throughout the 20th century. We trace the ethic back. We trace the ethic back to our oldest ancestor, Adam, through the cycle of prophethood, through people like Imam Ali, who said, "You are either my brother in faith or my equal in creation." We have the chance to write the next chapter in that. Even to Newt Gingrich, even to Pamela Geller, even to Robert Spencer, those who are not just ignorant, who are not just willfully ignorant, who are pseudo-educated, knowingly, cynically hateful. I seek to cultivate forgiveness. The way that my prophet, may the peace and blessings of God, cultivated his forgiveness when he re-entered Mecca and cast a general amnesty. The way he showed mercy when on that caravan to Mecca, he saw a dog and her pups from miles away and changed the route of the caravan so it wouldn't disturb her. May God grant us the strength to walk that path of mercy, to follow in the footsteps of our prophet.